y empezamos.
Bienvenidos al Tribunal Supremo de Elecciones, Casa de la Democracia Costarricense. Para la comodidad de todas las personas presentes, por favor apague o ponga en modo de silencio su teléfono celular. En caso de activarse la sirena de evacuación, mantenga la calma y diríjase a las salidas de emergencia en la parte frontal o posterior del lado derecho del auditorio y siga las instrucciones de nuestro personal y brigadistas. Los servicios sanitarios se ubican en el cuarto piso. Si requiere de información adicional, por favor refiérase a nuestro personal presente en esta actividad. Se les recuerda que en este auditorio es prohibido fumar y consumir alimentos. Gracias por su valiosa cooperación. Le deseamos una feliz estancia.
Muy buenas tardes. Les rogamos por favor ponerse en pie para recibir al señor presidente de la República, Rodrigo Chávez, y también a las personas que lo acompañan.
And the people that will accompany him this afternoon in the main table.
Muchas gracias, por favor.
Thank you. Let us be seated. The government of the Republic of Costa Rica gives you the warmest welcome to the second summit for democracy headed in Costa Rica. During this week, the government of Costa Rica has organized an agenda of events geared to encouraging the participation of civil society, especially the Organization of Youth of the Americas and the world over. In the discussion of forms to promote the role of the youth in political spaces and democratic spaces. In this moment, we have an auditorium full at the headquarters of the Supreme Election Tribunal of Costa Rica, and they're following from all the world in a live transmission from social networks. Now, it's a pleasure to me to introduce our first moderator this afternoon, Mrs. Crystal Ward Hudson, Deputy Minister of Youth, Minister of Culture and Youth of Costa Rica. To tell you a little bit about the Deputy Minister of the Youth, Minister of Culture and Youth of Costa Rica, she's a professional in social work with over 8 years of experience in the public sector. And she has promoted the integral development of communities and supporting the strengthening of leadership of the social stakeholders and entrepreneur youth of the province of Limón, a community predominantly Afro-descendant. She's a social activist and promoter of the rights of young people for over 10 years. In 12, 2012, she participated as a member of the Assembly of the National Consultation Network of the Young Person. She was designated before the National Board of the National Council of the Youth Person in the period 2013 and 2015, and she's president of the Canton Committee of the Young Person of Lima between 2014 and 2018. She has represented the youth of Costa Rica in international encounters in Panama, El Salvador, Brazil, and Brazil. Besides, she has represented the Afro-Costa Rican populations in international encounters in Nicaragua, Panama, and Colombia. So we give the warmest welcome to Ms. Karen. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to greet you as well. My name is Crystal Ward Hudson, Vice Minister of Youth, and here we're very pleased of having each one of you in this auditorium celebrating the Summit of for Democracy. Today we have a very high-level table. Today we have the participation of the Mr. President of the Republic of Costa Rica, Mr. Rodrigo Chávez Robles. Also, together with us, we have Mr. Rodrigo Arias Sanchez, President of the Congress of Costa Rica. Also accompanying us is Mr. Orlando Aguirre Gomez, President of the Supreme Court of Justice. We'll have the intervention of Mr. Max Esquivel, Magistrate, Vice President of the Supreme Elections Tribunal of Costa Rica. Justice. In this space, we have the participation of each one of these high-level panel members. For 5 minutes, they'll make an intervention according to the power they represent. We will begin with the participation of Mr. President of the Republic, Mr. Rodrigo Chávez Robles. After your intervention, we'll ask you the question. Yes, sir. I was prepared for action with the questions, answering questions. No, first we want to know more about the Costa Rican democracy. Okay, I think that the Costa Rican democracy is an example for the whole world. It's one of the few democracies that, according to such serious publications as The Economist of England, is a complete democracy. We are one of the countries where there's greater freedom of expression and press freedom. It's a country that doesn't even have an army, and that is not something minor. We decided many years ago not to have the resource of using the weapons as a temptation to govern through them or to attack somebody. This is a country where the respects of all of the minorities are respected, and where we can have a discussion, a very vigorous discussion about any subject matter of public policies, and then go and talk easily and drink a cup of coffee, because in Costa Rica there are very few political enemies. We have political rivals. But in order to formulate and implement public policies. But thanks God, up to where I can see, there is not a system of enmity or constant rivalry. This is a democracy that has a huge advantage that many other countries, even still being democratic, do not have, which is absolute credibility provided by having a Supreme Elections Tribunal that guarantees or ensures that voting will be effective, respected, and to comply with the will of sovereign people. And that is priceless. And there are very few points of comparison in the world. Madam Crystal, I could work for 10 hours on democracy. It's a topic that I'm passionate about, but I think that democracy is not, and I'm going to be very short in order to get into the real topic of the question you want to ask to me. Democracy, and especially before an audience of young people, democracy is not a weed that you let it there and it reproduces and overcomes all the other political systems or the options. No, democracy is something delicate that requires constant work, that requires attention. Why? Because I have not even defined what democracy is yet. And I wouldn't be surprised to say he talked a lot, but he did not define anything. Well, democracy are the rules of the game, not the result of the game, my dear friends are watching us. And for those rules to get to the result of the people may obtain the greatest prosperity possible of the election of the people for which or to which they vote, the decisions of public policy. That democracy has to be pure, we said, the Supreme Elections Tribunal. It has to be participatory. It has to be inclusive. And I said, these are the rules of the game, not the result of the match. It has the goal, the score has to be accepted, and for that we need legitimacy and to share values. Those rules of the game, it's very difficult to keep them, as you know, in other countries in the world. And from my standpoint, it's purity. It's the obligation of the generations, young generations, old generations, or elder generations, of middle age also, middle-aged generations, towards the Costa Ricans that have not even been born or that do not still have the age to exercise their citizen rights. It is our responsibility, shared responsibility, to carry out ahead in order to give that, to inherit that. Thank you, Madam Cristel. Thank you, Mr. President of the Republic. In this first block, we're going to allow each panel member to make a 5-minute intervention to refer about the subject matter from the power they represent. So following with this line, we pass the floor now to Mr. Rodrigo Arias Sanchez, who is President of the Legislative Assembly or Congress of Costa Rica. Okay, you let me know when the 5 minutes are over. I congratulate Mr. President of the Republic, Mr. Rodrigo Chavez, and Mr. Orlando Aguirre, President of the Supreme Court of Justice, Mr. Max Esquivel, President of the Supreme Elections Tribunal, and Madam Linda Thomas, Representative of the United States, Linda Greenfield, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, and Madam Ambassador of the United States, and Mr. Chancellor of Foreign Affairs Minister, members of the Supreme Powers, and dear ladies and gentlemen, guests here. I thank Mr. President of the Republic the invitation and of being part of this important international event that looks for the promotion and strengthening of democracy in the world over. This is a challenge that we must approach with deepness in a thorough manner. Democracies in their different ways and contents are being threatened by authoritarian currents that do not believe in freedom of people, neither in the universal rights, human rights effectiveness. The increase of authoritarianism is not a new phenomenon. In the 20th century, there were some ideological and political trends that tried to eliminate liberties and rights on the humanity. In that respect, liberties and democracies won, and it will not be different now. Once again, human dignity will prevail, and its core is liberty and the constitutional states, the rule of law. This is not just a subjective wish. It is supported in the historical facts, and especially in a fact that cannot be destroyed by no dictatorship at all. Human life is plural. It's in interest, in ideas, and in experiences. That is why pluralism is the distinctive feature of democracy that is expressed in its institutions and in its procedures. My dear friends, It is necessary, it is urgent to convey these convictions to the new generations so they can enrich them with their ideas and experiences and may join or incorporate in a conscious way in the fight for democracy in all of its dimensions. Let us remind ourselves, or remember so that democracy, above all, is a process of forming consensus, reaching agreements on the basis of shared opinions and fundamental ideas, even though they may differences or contradictions. The democratic roadway is the irrestricted respect to the Republican institutions and to autonomy of the will of the citizens. To create a collective will that's majority respectful of the minorities is the first duty or obligation of a politician and a democratic society. That is what the service of common wellness consists of. I believe that the challenges faced by democracies, my dear friends, and human rights and liberties are multiple and complex. We have to work all together to have success in the efforts that we assume in order to be able, in the differences of having a shared will and of building countries, nations, where all of the voices may fit, may be listened, and participate in decision making. Achieving this goal is not possible without the youth. Therefore, it is so important to design and execute actions that will deepen in the democratic consciousness of new generations and promote their new participation and new leaderships. To the youth, from the deepest point of our conviction, we make a respectful call so that they become in the spine of life and democracy, and in justice and in liberty. For the hope that youth represents and for the always young spirit of the principles of democracy and of liberty, we pass over our experience and our ideas to build always together a better country and a better humanity. Thank you very much. Thank you to Mr. President of Congress, Rodrigo Arias Sanchez. Now we continue with the intervention of Mr. Orlando Aguirre Gomez, President of the Supreme Court of Justice. Good afternoon. Mr. Rodrigo Chávez Robles, President of the Republic of Costa Rica. Mr. Rodrigo Arias Sanchez, President of Congress. Mr. Max Esquivel Farron, Vice President of the Supreme Election Tribunal. Madam Linda Thomas Greenfield, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen of the diplomatic body accredited in Costa Rica, ladies and gentlemen, ministers of Costa Rica and other participating countries, and high authorities, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of international organizations, youth delegates of the different organizations of the world, a warm greeting to all of you. I am very pleased in participating in this activity, in this summit, that we have to dimension the relevance or importance of the youth in the process of contemporary democracies. The merit of this summit and all of the summits related with democracy comes from the democratic vocation of their organizers and participants who, in recognition of the complex character of modern societies, we give our votes against threats challenging the stability of free nations. At the same time, we look to improve quality of our citizens living together and institutional living based on respect, the truth, justice, and the rule of law. It's unavoidable to reiterate that the youth strengthen democracies. They are the ones, from their passion and their transforming thirst that keep our social contract vibrant. They increase the standard of enforcefulness of rights, and they contribute to the renewal of democratic institutions. They are the age group with more favorable attitudes towards democratic values and with greater interest in global issues, attributed or attributes that convert them in agents that are extremely important and the perfecting of this form of life, of this form of society, which is democracy. It is clear that currently democracy is facing challenges, historic challenges, that go because of waste and transformation of societies, as well as because of the content of public policies that decide and propose the governments in each historic moment. In the core of everything, always the capacity of providing answer to old and new citizen demands or requests will be ensuring dignity of the people, complying the promise of democratic equity, and preserving social mobility as the result of the citizen commitment with daily effort and the respect of the regulations. That is, that approximation to democracy the approach to democracy must be done from a broad field that goes beyond the simple electoral calculus or simple electoral count, and that may consider the relevance and access of services to life quality and to satisfaction of the material demands and unmaterial demands also. The judiciary powers perform a critical role in the consolidation and strengthening of democracy, ensuring justice and equality before the law, ensuring that its administration be fair and impartial or unbiased, and that all the rights of all parts of the society are protected. Nevertheless, this dimension, which is fundamental, requires certainly to be adjusted to current times. And current times, the courts have to open up and encourage linkage with citizenship, ensuring access to basic services of justice, especially to groups historically marginated or vulnerable, which tend to be prey of inequities in access to information and to the resources necessary to make their rights value in society. For the Costa Rican case, to approach this challenge has meant making our greatest efforts or the best efforts of our government organizations, friendly countries and organizations of society to promote the participation of youths and to strengthen their commitment with democracy and the rule of law. An example of that is the education project, Building Justice, a network of leading youth developed by the foundation, Omar Dengo Foundation, and the National Commission for the Improvement of Administration of Justice, CONAPAM, that belongs to the judiciary power, with the support of the government of the United States, whose ambassador is accompanying us today here. So, as the contemporary public debate requires developing important processes of literacy is fundamental, or to address the gaps of the literacy of justice administration of justice. I mean, not only to make use of judiciary services, but also, but it's very important, to participate in an informed manner in the debates that without any unavoidable are originated by judiciary decisions. Not always do we see that the participation of the youth would be with a good training, with a good literacy on the system of administration of justice. It is key that the youth understand the understanding of the judiciary system and they enrich the public debate and they'll be better prepared to lead the future. All of this demands from the judiciary powers a more aware role, participatory role in the defense of human rights and the promotion of democratic values through innovating proposals based on dialogue, constructive dialogue with the different stakeholders of society, and in order to ensure that the youth may have access to the same rights and to the same opportunities that the rest. I think that the judiciary powers will remain a strength of democracy as long as they acknowledge their place, their role, next to the needs of the people. They protect and defend their rights and individual liberties and to open spaces for the participation. Finally, the judiciary power of Costa Rica, we assume the mission of looking for providing to the youth all of the reasons so they continue betting on democracy, helping them to empower their wills to build a horizon in which they frame their present and from it they may conceive and preserve our Republican tradition, privileging justice over order, justice over everything else. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the Magister, the President of the Supreme Court. Next, Magister of the Tribunal of Elections, or Max Esquivel, Rodrigo Chavez, President of the country, Rodrigo Arias, President of Congress, Orlando Aguirre, President of the Supreme Court of Justice, Linda Thomas Greenfield, representative of the United States before the United Nations. Good afternoon to members of the diplomatic body and high personalities of government and all of you friends or those who are following it virtually. We welcome you into this institution, which we are proud of. It guarantees the purity of elections. We cannot forget the scar that closed the open injured because of the political violence in the 40s. Most Costa Ricans that we have gray hair, some of us do not have enough to comb, but we come from those who shed blood among that conflict of brothers, but with hope and courage, we constructed these civic bases to have 74 years of stability, continuous stability. Nothing that we have done in these 200 years of independence better than that. Being able to accomplish the agreements and to rise the institutionality that allow us to live peacefully is the most valuable inheritance, our democracy. And this plays on top of our shoulders the weight to preserve it, to work for it for future generations. That's why we're pleased to host during this second summit for democracy, during conferences and meetings to strengthen democracy throughout the world. And we work together with the Netherlands, Korea, and Zambia. I want to congratulate the joint work with different institutions in Costa Rica, the Presidency, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Culture and Youth, and the Tribunal of Elections. This second summit focus in the promotion of the role of the youth in democratic spaces. I'm convinced that the relation of our youth with democratic processes enhances democracy, because I have an essential affinity between democracy and youth. Meaning the treasure of youth make us to treasure it so much, especially when we don't have it. It's the open future of many possibilities and different experiences to select. In this sense, we can say that democracy is like eternal youth for the countries. In every exercise, with every election, opens the collective opportunity to reinvent ourselves, to have a different dream, to wake up of different dreams, and to look for a more expanded future. So the youth have better reasons to vote. This will create consequences for good or for the bad of the countries. It's longer the life these youngsters have before them. If their future and the future of the country is the future of the youth. What they want to do with this beautiful gift of life will be framed or limited or empowered by the conditions to develop them. Their country offers them conditions that depend always of politics. We are the problems of society that become close. Options for the new generations can be overcome politically, but also everything that we offer, our countries offer its citizens that are just to begin to life can be dealt with politics. Boys and girls, these advocating for the liberty is the greatest struggle, which has more dignity, with be more.
The supreme powers of Costa Rica, President Chavez, Legislative Assembly President Arias, Supreme Court President Aguirre, and TSE President Zamora. Thank you for hosting us throughout this summit. We're grateful to have had you as generous hosts, and we've been fortunate to be together for this powerful week of programming. It's been truly a week of democracy. I thought I would follow up my keynote with a few more thoughts on the importance of harnessing youth participation to revitalize democracy. This year, as I mentioned, we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All human beings, states that noble document, are equal in rights and dignity. This profound statement is not an opinion, it is a fact. Our human rights are inalienable and indivisible. They're interdependent and interrelated, and they are universal today, and they will affect them even more tomorrow. I think of the girls and young women in particular. The UN Secretary General warned us earlier this month that at the current rate, it will take 300 years to reach gender equality. 300 years. That's not good enough for our children. As democracies, though, we don't have to sit here and accept that fate. We have a remarkable ability. I represent the United States to the world, and that is proof that progress is possible. Today, many countries around the world, around the globe, are joining us in facing a reckoning that far too long, too many groups that have been left out and left behind, that the marginalized must be respected, that we must make our universal human rights real for everyone, and that we must especially work to acknowledge that young people must be uplifted and included, that youth leaders are not just future leaders, they are leaders, period. So I'm glad that our Costa Rican colleagues have provided this platform to exchange ideas and share recommendations going forward. It's why we have been so supportive of the Youth Political Participation Cohort, and it's why we support young people running for office, working within civil society, creating peace-building movements, or starting law. In Zambia, we have focused on the integral role that free and fair elections serve as a cornerstone of democracy. In the Netherlands, we have addressed challenges to media freedoms in today's information atmosphere. And in Washington, D.C., our colleagues have worked to shape the ecosystem of emerging technologies in line with democratic principles and human rights. These are timely, vital topics, and I want you to know all of those co-hosts have recognized the importance of engaging youth, of engaging young people. Your message is resonating around the world, and I want you to know this summit is not just a meeting, Mr. President. This is a rallying point. It's a launch pad. It's a place to reaffirm our global commitment to innovate, to collaborate, to act. So here's my challenge to all of you. Leave today with at least one action you are going to take, at least one thing you personally will do to advance our democracies, at least one way you will put young people at the center of your work. If everyone here does that, then we will be that much closer to leaving the next generation with the resilient, robust, prosperous democracies they deserve. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias a la señora embajadora
Mrs.
Linda Thomas
Ambassador
Greenfield, de la
Linda Thomas
embajadora
Greenfield,
de Estados Unidos de América
US
ante Naciones Unidas.
Ambassador, representative to UN. Costa Rica, being co-host of the summit, developed this event promoting the role of youth in political spaces. We generate a second space where civil society youth can ask a question to the panelists. Now is the time, Mr. President. We'll begin with the intervention of Graciela Vargas, who is director of the Youth Assemble. She's represented as member of the board. Please stand up. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here and the one who will ask the question to Mr. President. A representative of the highest representative of Youth Assembly Costa Rica, we have a concern which is very little participation in the decision-making process. So, Mr. President, what could be the strategies in the government to promote real participation of the youth in democratic spaces? Thank you. Thank you, Graciela. I was prepared to be asked anything. I love that one. Because I will base myself in history. I want to quote Miss John F. Kennedy, do not ask what the country can do for you, but what can you do for your country? That is my free translation. I will tell you, when you see very few about something, the mind of the economist, I have seen of being one of them, tells you that very little supply or little demand or both thing. If something is very abundant, is produced it is consumed a lot. If we see that we have little participation in democratic processes on the part of the youth, maybe there's no opportunities, maybe that's the supply from society, or because the youth cannot participate, or both. How much time do I have? 3 minutes. Wow. Well, okay. So, the first thing I have to say is that you have to increase both, but the demand, the desire of the youth to participate in politics, it's what I think. It's the main restriction right now. Of course, we need to open more spaces, and we're doing it. But think about that truly the participation, your participation, Mr. Magistrate mentioned, have more selfish participation interest than the person who is at the end of their life, because the well-being of the younger person for a long period depend on the decisions that are taken in the democracy and the exercise of power. In fact, we have seen that how generations, historically speaking, have disappointed people in power, especially old people. They disappointed the youth in the historical events. I will tell you. What about the destruction of the environment? We, conceptually, nobody can say this is one of my proposals, we can export all the timber of Costa Rica's forest to generate a surplus that allow us to do public policy we could not do any other way. That will be an intergenerational disappointment, because you in the future will have to live the consequences of a desert countries. But governments, democratically or not elected, they are responsible. They increase the debt of the country, and who has to pay this? Future generations. And I'm talking about public debt, because they cannot have their means to buy a home, because the rates will be huge. We have seen that in our country, in the world, and we have neighbors where the youth right now do not know what are they going to have for supper tomorrow as a result of decisions that were taken because of the lack of democratic concourse. Why do we have to participate more? Because it's good for you. It's convenient. It's part of your own interest. Because Gandhi's quote, Mohandas Gandhi said, the best way of imagining your future is building it. And the only way you can build your own future is from at minimum voting and becoming responsible, submitting your names, your ideas, your ideals to the concourse of democratic concourse in order to acquire, to be able to get power in the good sense of the word, to implement the things you believe it will take you to a material well-being in some other ways, whatever you want, the well-being you want. We know that it's difficult to judge different societies, to compare societies. Norway against, for example, Ireland, both member of the EU, with similar, but their tests. John Rawls, the great American politician. If you want to being randomly choose the country between A and B in which you would like that your probability to be born there, where would you have a highest probability of being happy? But that is a very passive attitude. Graciela, you can take control. What does the state have to do in order to increase the supply? Luck, my grandmother stated that. She was not so famous as the ones I quoted. Luck is to be ready when the opportunity arrives, and the state have the obligation of prepare you to be ready through a system of public health, of education that will provide you the cognitive elements and the historical knowledge, and also the civility that we have forgotten, not ideological, is citizens' responsibility. So the opportunity or the desire of a young person arrive, you would be ready. On my part, I have an expectation, a very short expectation in terms of the exercise of power. I still have 3 years to go. I have appointed young persons, very capable, but that is not what you can do. Participating in the transformations are pieces of timber floating in the ocean instead of being ships navigating to the destination you want to go, and to demand from the state to have you ready with both things, health, education, that imply a lot of things. In a democratic process, that's the best, from my point of view, way of living the long life God willing each one of you will have. Thank you for your answer, Mr. President. Next intervention, Marlison Ramasan will be asking the question to the President of Congress. Good afternoon to all of you. Marlison Ramasan Torres, I'm the coordinator of Municipal Network of Youth in Local Governments, and also municipal region. Political parties must have a quota in order to renew leadership in political parties. But youngsters, we feel as this has not been sufficient. Don Rodrigo, what can Congress do to generate more participation of the youth, especially in the process of decision taking, to where we can see the generational renewal? Thank you. Maybe what can Congress do? We can see in Congress any agreement, any project is very difficult. It takes time, a lot of discussion, but to find a solution, legal solution, I think here participation issue, Mr. President mentioned it, has to go more in depth. You are young and maybe you don't understand the concept that in life voids, private or public life, if you don't feel them, somebody will feel it. That's a universal principle. So I believe The youth cannot just stay as a spectator. You must act. You must have a participation role. You must have the awareness that problems we have nowadays in our country and the problems that we can see worldwide, crises that are affecting the world. And the biggest one would be climate change that would affect all your life, the life of all of you, because we have a shorter expectation of life. Problems that you should become aware of how to prepare the solutions and to provide solutions to deal with these problems. Not just in climate change, in so many problems that we have. The fight against poverty, inequality. I mentioned in my first words, democracy is pluralism. Pluralism is manifested in every branch of society. And that's why I think the conviction of believing in democracy is the fundamental base of this awareness, this consciousness the youth will have. It's sadly to see Latin American indicators and worldwide indicators where the conscience in the defense, the conscience, the awareness and the belief of the youth in democratic principle, it's low. Because it should be the other way around. You should be the ones who have higher conscience and interest that in that democracy would strengthen. We have our weaknesses in the democracy as any political system. Winston Churchill mentioned it. There are 1,000 problems, but it's still the best system. I believe in more thinking about quotas. You, the youth, must have the awareness and you must have developed these convictions to believe in these participations, because only participating you can face the problems. You will be the players, you will be the stakeholders of the solutions, and you must be. Right now we have political parties that have different percentages in participation. Some these demands about 20% in order to register for the elections. That is subject to self-regulation depending on the party. Congress could participate in reforming more than this, but we could think in reforming municipalities. You represent the municipal system where the municipal code and can be reformed in this sense in order to provide more participation to the youth. But all of that, I think, though, is complementary of a higher vision, the conviction of the youth to face the problematic we have in our country and the world. Thank you.
We thank the participation of Mr. President of Congress, Rodrigo Arias Sanchez. Now we continue with the third question that is addressed to the Supreme Court of Justice and be in charge of Mr. Kenneth Chavez Morales, representative of Rural Youth. Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Kenneth Chavez Morales. I'm the director para Macao, that's what constitute the Garavito, Quepos, and Porrita territories. I'm from the province of Punta Arenas. Mr. Orlando, Mr. Aguirre, there are many issues that from rural youth we have possession, and one is generating safe spaces for young people. What actions or policies are being promoted from the Supreme Court of Justice for this purpose? Thank you. The youth faces currently many issues or problems, and they have a lot of challenges. Unemployment, limited access to education, but possibly one of the greatest problems faced by the youth of these times is drug addiction, drug trafficking, and all the consequences that this brings for all of the youth or young people, and for, we could say, for all of us that have children and grandchildren. We're still worried about the security of our children when they're going to school. What security or safety do they have over there? Of course, the function of the judiciary power is one that, and we all hope that that is how it should be, which is administering justice in an effective and efficient way, and a type of value that flowers in face of the problems presented by the drug trafficking is the hope of severe justice, of justice that reacts in the face of this problem with sanctions or punishments that necessarily have to be confinement or imprisonment. We, in the judiciary power of Costa Rica, we have made a distinction. We separate the topic of youth delinquency or youth crime that can involve also everything that has to do with this environment of insecurity. And we think that the answer to those behaviors is not necessarily imprisonment. Up until a few years ago, you couldn't think of having a solution of conflict or conflict solution of juvenile criminals that was not the punishment of the punishment. But as I said, we are convinced that that is not the correct way. And we are choosing on programs or for programs that give a different dimension to the system of justice administration when it has to do, when we're dealing about youth or young people. And I'm talking about restorative justice. If there is an age sector that allows or enables approaches with effects of changing, is the youth sector. And that is why we have very aggressive programs, I would say, to apply in the case of youth crime or delinquency, to apply restorative justice with additional programs that what they're looking for is precisely to redirect these youth that have been surprised in crime or in delinquency, trying that they take the right way. And for that, obviously, we need the support of organizations, and we have it, as a matter of fact, from friendly countries like the United States that have been cooperating to us in these programs. We have also, let us say, the support and even some programs, the executive power that they're performing. I'm going to mention one right now. That is, the approach of this issue has to necessarily be a joint one, because the approach It's not simply punishing a behavior. The approach is thorough, integral. It has to be thorough or integral. That is why we also are at this moment with the Ministry of Education trying to take through the schools and the high schools programs for the training of the people looking towards peace in a vision of which are really the human conflicts that we are facing in these moments and how can we solve them. I believe that putting the system of justice administration in that direction, we are contributing to create a safer environment for the youth, for the coming youths, and of course, safer for all of us. But this is a forecast of the justice administration system that requires an unconditional support of all of the sectors of the state, and I do not think that it will be also without all of the civil society, because this is a program, an education program where we all have to be committed, and not necessarily the only committed one is the state through the schools and the high schools. Thank you. We thank the participation of Mr. Orlando Aguirre Gomez, President of the Supreme Court of Justice, and we continue with the participation of Ana Francini González Ábalos, who will be addressing the question to Mr. Max Esquivel Farrón, Vice President of the Supreme Election Tribunal. Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Ana Francini González Ábalos. I'm from Garavito, Punta Arenas. I'm activist for the human rights and rights of women and youths. Mr. Max, the question is, what actions can be implemented by the Supreme Elections Tribunal to promote the star participation of young women in political spaces? Thank you, Ana Francini. I think that to give an adequate answer, it will be good to review which are the 4 functions that the Tribunal has identified, which one can help us more to achieve the objective that you are looking for with your question. The Tribunal has functions of electoral administration. It organizes elections, and functions of justice, electoral justice, solves conflicts, and overseeing electoral political issues, and also public register. It ensures the identity of the citizens and elaborates the electoral pattern, and it has also functions of training in democratic values through the Institute of Studies in Democracy. If you see, well, the question you're asking me, we're talking about a population that seems to begin losing, and I'm going to explain why. In our country, for a long time, and still now, it happens in a lesser degree, but still, it has thought that politics is an issue of men. And it was until a very short time ago, measures were taken for the strong incorporation of women, not only in the party structure, but also in the popular election positions properly, and we're still working on that. Also, it has been thought that politics is an issue of adults, older adults, not young adults. So young women enter with a hindrance created from the beginning, with a hurdle created from the beginning in order to participate politically. If you ask me, in what can the tribunal have a greater incidence? Although it is true, as electoral judge, it can oversee rights of participation in the face of violations committed, as we have done. Although it is true, with electoral administration, we can have incidence for the statutes or regulations of the parties comply with establishing mechanism of the youth participation as the law has established. Although it is true that as a registrator, civil registrator, it can take action so that no that amount of youth, and especially young women, are not left out of the electoral pattern that has happened in previous elections. I feel what the previous panel members mentioned. The most fertile field to avoid all of this to happen and to heal for this solution is the field of training and values. And there's where somehow the work that we do through the Institute of Training and Studies in Democracy is the one that bets precisely to take actions on that respect. I commend some that we have taken and that obviously we have to deepen on them. We work since early ages with the youth when they're even children from the beginning. We have achieved, for instance, that the student electoral code that exists includes also the concept of parity and alternability, and this has been done through programs developed by the Institute of Training and Studies in Democracy. That is, the student governments of all of the schools and high schools, 50% of the people that form part of the student government of the political process is governed by parity and alternation. We have produced also a work with electoral student tribunals through audiovisual material that is shared with them to ensure that once that they become citizens, that is women, especially now, they come with that training from school and high school. The other topic, work with training of leaderships for young women. And here we've made a partnership with an organization called We Female Women Connecting, and precisely what that program looks for is to train young women in political leadership. And we have carried out already trainings with 4 generations of young women that have been part of this program that is so important. And we have always been checking education material focus specifically on these topics. We have carried out workshops. We have still to encourage political participation of women through workshops called Gender and Participation, Political Participation of Women, another type of workshops called Citizenship with Gender Focus. They all work at high school level and also with group of youth that we expect to continue carrying out through in the remaining time and for the future. That is, we're not going to stop. That's what I meant. What is the secret? Maybe to add more incidents to this that we're doing is to take advantage of instruments such as digitalization to youth. To the youth, we have to speak in the language they like more in this moment. So we have to take advantage, especially the digital platforms, to power those results. This is an advertisement. Taking advantage, we have people from the diplomat course. But any help you can give us on this respect, it will be very effective because, as I said, we're working on that and we want to continue going ahead, because we're convinced of the needs, as I said in my previous intervention, that the youth may appropriate the politics. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now we have the intervention of Daniel to address the U.S. Ambassador before the United Nations. Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Daniel Lopez. I'm former fellow from the Young Leaders of America Initiative of the Department of State of the Government of the United States. Also, I'm representative of the Committee of the Young Person of the Canton of Quepos.
So, Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, in your keynote you said that we need to do the hard work of showing up not only to the elections, but also between elections. So, what does that look like? And how do you recommend young people lead a life of public service? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, and I couldn't have asked for a more relevant question for me. Because what happens, and particularly in the United States, is people, and particularly young people, get really excited when there's an election and when politicians are talking to them. And when the election is over, they forget. They go back to whatever it is they're doing. And then they are upset when the issues that are important to them are not being dealt with by the politicians, whether it's gun control, or it's student loans, or it's jobs for young people. So what I meant is that young people should stay engaged all the time. They need to advocate to their politicians. They need to remind the politicians why they supported them. They need to push for change. On the issue of public service, I heard the president quote the late President Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And that's what service is about. It's about what you can do every single day to improve how your country functions, how it supports its people every day. And it could be, it could be you seek a job in public service, as I have done, or you start a business where you're giving jobs to young people, or you community organize, or you do some of the things that all of you young people are doing here today. All of that is service. It's service to your country, it's service to your people. And I have to tell you, as a public servant myself, I have never felt one day that my work was boring. I've never felt one day that I shouldn't do what I'm doing. And so what public service means is doing those things that you know will make a difference in people's lives every single day. And if you young people don't take on that challenge, then no one will. So I want to encourage you to seek a life of service. Thank you.
Agradecemos la intervención
We
de
thank
esta
the
mesa de
intervention
alto
of this
nivel.
high-level table.
Con esta última
With this
intervención
last
damos por
intervention, we
concluido
finish this event, this stage of the event, sorry. We ask respectfully to the panel members to please come to sit down in the first row. Thank you very much for the attention of each one of you. Now we continue with the last block of this event. I want to thank you. Please let us continue. Let's give a good hand to Mrs. Deputy Minister of Youth of Costa Rica. ID International is an organization that dedicates itself to study and promote democracy all over the world. Now we're going to listen a message from its Secretary General, Mr. Kevin Casas Zamora, in occasion of the celebration of the second Summit for Democracy.
Es un gusto saludarlos.
It's a
Mi
pleasure
nombre es
to greet
Kevin
you. My
Casas
name
y
is
soy el
Kevin Casas
secretario
Zamora. I'm
general
the
de IDEA
Secretary General
Internacional.
of IDEA International.
Me complace mucho ser
I'm very
parte,
pleased to
así
be
sea
part,
virtualmente, de esta
either
cumbre regional
virtually,
organizada por el gobierno de
the
Costa
regional
Rica. Me llena de
activity
alegría que sea
organized by the
mi
government of Costa
país,
Rica. I'm very
que soy
happy that
miembro
it's my country,
fundador de
who
IDEA
is a
Internacional,
founding member of IDEA
el que
Internacional,
albergue un evento tan
to host
importante
such an
para
important
apoyar la
event
causa
to support the
democrática
democratic
en
cause
nuestra región
in our
y en el
region
mundo.
and in the world.
Esto es consistente con la
This
identidad de
is in
Costa
line
Rica,
with the identity of Costa
ligada desde
Rica,
hace mucho
linked
no
since
solo a la
long ago
defensa de los valores
not only
democráticos,
to
el
defense of
Estado de
democratic
Derecho,
values and the rule of law and human rights, but on its daily practice. For us, Costa Rica's democracy is not only a government system, but a way of life. This is an identity that fills me of pride as a Costa Rican. As some of you know, IDEA International is an international organization with 34 member states of all of the regions and a mandate to support democracy in the world. We have participated in a decided way in the Summit for Democracy from the moment that it was proposed. We feel honored of being one of the coordinators of the Global Coalition for Democracy that groups today over 100 organizations of all the world dedicated to democracy and human rights. This coalition makes it possible that those organizations interact with the summit and transmit or convey their concerns to the official process. With this general support of the European Union, we have created a broad portal with information about the summit. At the time that we have facilitated the organizations of civil society in proposing and monitoring the commitments assumed by the governments on this process. During this process. Besides that, we are very involved in several of the work groups or task force of the group, and we have played a role of leadership in two of them, the one of gender equity and the one of youth. It has been a pleasure to co-lead the group of work with youth together with the European Union, the governments of Nepal and Ghana, and organizations such as Africtivities, EDIN, and MPB, and we could feel proud of the work done since we began last year. Let me give you a couple of examples. First of all, in the context of the Forum of the Global Coalition for Democracy carried out in Brussels and in Washington, D.C., last month, the task force shared a list of 33 possible commitments to facilitate the political and civic participation of youth. I hope that those recommendations be adopted by many governments and organizations in all over the world. In second place, the task force has issued a call for action to strengthen the participation of young voices, especially of those coming from the global south, in the discussions to define the future of the summit. And as I mentioned before, in IDEA International, we have complemented the efforts of the task force with a system of monitoring of the commitments assumed in the summit with respect to the youth, as well as to close work with many organizations for the youth to visibilize those commitments assumed by the governments. All of this work is important, not only for the youth, but also for everyone that is concerned on the luck of democracy. Finally, democracy is only alive when the young people works fully and assumes political leadership in equal conditions. Those of us who believe in democracy must believe or remember that this is the principle of equality before the law, but also in decision-making that gives a huge power to the democratic model. That's why it is essential that we open the space and we mobilize knowledge, passion, and the vision of youth in this effort of every one of us to rethink the democratic process now and in the future. The truth is that as I observe more what is happening around us, I am convinced more that the energy and the ideas to revitalize democracy do not come from the governments. They come from the citizenship and from civil society, particularly from youth. The young people is today the one that is moving ahead core causes for the future of the planet, like the fight against climate change, the awareness against racism, and the search for peace. That's why I'm very pleased to know that the core topic of this regional summit is the political and civic participation of youth. This collective effort is vital to strengthen and renew democracy, and we're here to support it at every step and for the time that it be necessary. Thank you very much, and to those of you who are not Costa Ricans, please enjoy Costa Rica because it's a marvelous place.
We begin now the second segment of this afternoon, which will be moderated by Mr. Hugo Picado Leon, Director of the Institution of Training Studies and Democracy of the Supreme Elections Tribunal. He's an attorney and a politologist, a doctor in his rule of law and global governance by the University of Salamanca. He's official of the Supreme Elections Tribunal since 1993. During the electoral process, he has been electoral advisor, subcoordinator, and coordinator of the program of electoral advisors, supervisor of electoral programs, speaker before mass media, and responsible of the program Informed Voter. He has had a prestigious academic degree in law as in political science and multiple publications in this subject matter. He is Justice of the Supreme Elections Tribunal. Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Diana, and thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. President of the Republic, Mr. Rodrigo Chavez, Mr. Rodrigo Arias, President of Congress, Mr. Orlando Aguirre, President of the Supreme Court of Justice, and Mr. Max Esquivel, Deputy President of the Supreme Elections Tribunal, and Madam Ambassadors, Mr. Ambassadors, Ambassadors, friends of all. Continuing with this program, promoting participation of youth in political space and in democratic spaces, we have now a table of experts that I request you come up to the main table as you are being called. Okay, we will have at our table of experts people that have worked the topic of youth at continental level and that were going to enrich us with their perspectives. Among us, we have Mr. Roger Alberto Tejada Bryden, who is the Minister of Government of Panama. Let's receive also Madam Patricia Portela, representative of UNICEF in Costa Rica. We also have Mr. Rafael Felix Garcia, Minister of Youth of the Dominican Republic. We have also with us Mr. Thomas Garrett, Secretary General of the Community of Democracies. And with us also we have Mrs. Abby Finkenauer, Special Envoy of the United States for Global Topics on Youth. As I was telling you, these experts represent different regions of the Americas, and they are stakeholders, important stakeholders in subject matter topic of youth and democracy. The methodology of this table is the following one. Each one of the members of the table will receive a question from youths of different sectors, and the person to whom the question is asked will have 3 minutes only to answer. At the end of the panel, we will have also a participation of the Government of Canada and of the European Union.
To begin with, the first question is for Mr. Roger Alberto Tejada Bryden, the Minister of Government of Panama, and the question is asked by Jesus Morales, President of the National Assembly of the Youth Person. Good afternoon, everyone. Excellent Minister Tejada, welcome to our country. I hope you feel at home, as the rest of you in the panel. What are the strategies that from the Government of Panama are being promoted for the participation of the youth in political spaces in the region? Good afternoon, everyone, friends in this panel, Mr. President of Costa Rica, judicial power, Congress, and the tribunal who have invited us here, all of you youngsters, since I have 3 minutes, very short, but we feel at home. Greetings from our President Laurentino Cortés and the Vice President Cardizo. From Panama, we have established important advances but we still have a lot of challenges. 23% of the population, over 4 million, is a younger population. That's why we establish a public policy about the youth together with PNUD. This is a program of the United Nations through actions and starting this Council of Political Policies for the Youth. We were able to gather everyone to a national dialogue, different platforms. With this generation, the hyperactive generation, as I call it, this generation somehow is connected. That's why it's being called hyper-connected, not just with social networks, but with technology. Using these tools, our country established an open platform in order to gather proposals of what should be a public proposal. This was established nationwide, even the original nations, the Afro descendants, disabled populations, LGBTQ plus, and all the vulnerable populations, in order not to differentiate among them, but to include everybody and not to leave anybody out. This proposal, this way we wanted to receive proposals, and we got 180,000 proposals, and we received 18,000 proposals electronically, summarized in 83 agreements nationwide that are part of integral policy of the youth from 2022 to 2027. This is a vision of a short, medium, and long term, but this effort is part of the efforts of the government. Besides this policy, I have to mention the key word that we should use, not just for Panama, but for the region. It's citizens' participation. Panama, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic have characterized for important dialogues, consensus, solid democracies, according to Gallup, who have been able to measure in some other international agencies how our democracies have developed. And this participation that have been key have taken political parties to integrate the youth through different movements with calls, not the youth seeking the parties, but the parties looking for the youth. These civil movements that have been included in this dialogue is in the middle of crisis, as the President of Costa Rica mentioned. It's to establish consensus dialogue beyond repression and any other measure that would be aggressive against civil and social movements, in this case, the youth. That's why we can summarize that a good practice always will be to establish technological tools to generate a good social dialogue that would be inclusive, to include all the population, vulnerable populations, and integrate in each one of its spaces all of these youth that would contribute building government programs and the transparency and the accountability and the inclusion gender equality, and some other values and principles, which is the freedom of expression, which some of the contributions from our youth um, as a result of these consultations and should be practiced by the rest of the countries. And that's the way many countries are doing in this region. They have practiced this system and have been very successful. Thank you for your answer, Alberto Tejada, the Minister of Government of Panama. Next question is for Mrs. Patricia Portela de Souza, representative of UNICEF Costa Rica. And to ask the question is Lester Fernandez Carrillo, which is the young representative of the Red Cross, Costa Rican Red Cross. Good afternoon, Mrs. Patricia Portela. The question is as follows. What is the role international agents play in the case UNICEF to strengthen the participation of the youth in democratic spaces from the perspective of sustainable development goals? Thank you, Lester. Good afternoon, everyone. President, President of Congress, President of the Supreme Court, of the Electoral Tribunal, ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors, my friends of the United Nations together in the table, and youngsters, adolescents. It's very nice to be here. We support adolescents and young directly and networks and the institutionality and civil society in order to guarantee that each youngster, each adolescent have all the opportunities that have in order to develop potentialities. Opportunities is key. We have to guarantee access to services. I was listening yesterday some of the sessions of this important summit, and I'm very pleased to be here with this fantastic panel. And I heard yesterday they have access to the services, and Mr. President emphasized this: education, health, protection, social protection are fundamental for democracy. For me, having this approach to see democracy also as the rules of the game that assure opportunities and access to services that are opportunities for all. Why participation of the youth is important in political spaces? The participation is a human right. The General Observation number 20 of 2016 about the rights of children is focused in the implementation of the children's rights during adolescence. This underlines a focus based on human rights to recognize and respect the dignity and the condition of subjects of law, of adolescents, and this is extended to adolescents and youngsters for a special moment in their life where they need the support. These include the empowerment, citizenship, participation in decision taking in topics that affect directly and indirectly their lives. Civic commitment, the participation of youngsters are essential, not just because this comply with one of their rights, but it contributes to the positive development of individuals and groups that benefit communities and is good for democracy and more for the planet we live in. The civic participation is useful as a school of democracy and prepare new generations committed through practical learning within the democratic process trust in institutions is increased by participation of citizenship, beginning at the early age. At early age, that's why, and all the processes that we have mentioned during these days, that children's elections and the boards of youngsters in educational centers in the country, in Costa Rica, become uh, core strategies for them to participate in associations in critical moments. I open a window. One of my happiness in Costa Rica is to accompany in the last elections through children's elections in the Museum of Children and through the participative councils of PANI. And this is very promising for Costa Rica, and it was beautiful to see children involved in the democratic process and how they wanted to speak up in the discussion of important topics. These are important processes. Here is the participation begins at municipal level within political parties and elections in order to elect the governments of each country. The participation and empowerment of children and adolescents in the programs and policies is essential for reducing these figures of abstentionism that affect this region of Latin America. How to make these youngsters participate. Those adults who lead processes must have the knowledge and the skills in order to interact with adolescents and youngsters in their different contexts. You have to do this participative way, an inclusive way, recognizing the role of agents, the role of agents of change, and I include children also. It's not just to call youngsters to sit them in a working table. I would be more bold. We need to think, to bring, for instance, to redesign the table, to rethink the structure and the content of the things we're going to work in the table, co-leading processes and discussions in policies and projects, taking into account their visions and how they see the present and the future. We need to promote the inclusion and participation of groups, especially vulnerable ones, as the Minister of Panama mentioned. Let's think about young women, the indigenous populations, Afro-descendants, migrants, disabled groups. In gender, we need to avoid exclusion, otherwise we'll pay a very high price. It's necessary to guarantee different voices of different young populations in formulating policies and implementation and monitoring policies. How to support the youngsters? Let's ask them how to best support them in this process. Let's talk to them. In our dialogues with the children and adolescents and youngsters, we have pointed, and we always pointed the need to have more information, tools, empowerment, work to develop their competencies of leadership and to promote processes and to exercise their right to the participation in development. You have to pay special attention to the topics of gender parity, territoriality, vulnerability conditions in order to guarantee to have equality of opportunities for all in an equal way. Poverty, distance, the origin, the culture, or the gender condition should not stop them to participate in this context. It's essential for democracy from the international agencies of the United Nations, like UNICEF, we support the institutions of the state that have a fundamental role for promoting and, and the participation of adolescents and youngsters in democratic spaces in order to accomplish the ODSs. I think it's fundamental. The ODSs will not be able to success without a very close participation, very active participation of young adolescents and children. They are the present and also the future of all the countries. There's no democracy without the exercise of the right of youngsters. Democracy is good for children and youngsters. Others like us, we go beyond insisting the children and adolescents and the young are very good and essential for democracy. In conclusion, a topic that in the previous table, the president of the tribunal elections, the tribunal, the needs of tools and digital platforms that we have in Costa Rica. We have some platforms already ready, working, and promoting participation of youngsters in several environments of the institutionality and dialogue with society. And I have in mind one platform we have supported together with other institutions like Vice Minister of Youth. Thank you, Lester, for your question. The Red Cross, in your report. We have the same platform around the world. 95 countries involved, 28 million adolescents and youngsters in Costa Rica, almost 7,000 we have used a way of promoting consultations. It's a platform that is available, and I'm informing you that this is ready for the society in Costa Rica, for all of us to use with and for adolescents. Thank you. Thank you, Patricia Portela de Souza, representative of UNICEF Costa Rica, for your answer. Next question is for Mr. Thomas Garrett, General Secretary of the Community of Democracies. You will have 3 minutes to answer the question proposed by Esmeralda Porres Gutierrez, young representative of the Population Fund of the United Nations. I think Esmeralda is not present. I have a third question, but I don't know if it's the same. Please, go ahead. Please introduce yourself and ask the question. My name is Kendra. I'm 18 years of age and part of the Afro Descendants National Network. And I'm Costa Rican first context. The 8th of December, the Community of Democracy has just established 20 recommendations to increase the participation in democracy. And the question is, what actions will you execute from the Community of Democracies in order to comply with these recommendations for Latin America and the Caribbean?
Thank you to the supreme authorities of Costa Rica for this country's decision to focus its part of the summit of the Summit for Democracy on the idea of youth engagement. I also want to say welcome, Excellencies, distinguished guests, and especially to all of the young people gathered from around the world in this room, but also watching us live streamed through social media. Thank you very much for the question. I'm glad you were here to ask that of me. I can say actually that I might have answered this question differently yesterday than I probably will today. The community of democracies, for those who are less familiar with this, is currently made up of 28 nations which serve on our governing council. And among those 28 nations on the governing council, 9 countries from the Latin American region, including Costa Rica, of course, are very active members in the work that we do in support of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. As you mentioned, it was in December that our program, the Youth Leads, presented 20 policy recommendations to increase youth engagement in public life. Those recommendations came about as a follow-up to the very first Summit for Democracy in 2021, and it looked at the commitments that were made by the states in the earlier version of the Summit for Democracy, and it took those into consideration during this year of action. And it took the ideas that were gathered there and it put it towards the idea of specifically youth engagement. Some of these policy recommendations were highlighted earlier this morning in this room by the Youth Leads during our Community of Democracies event entitled How to Increase Youth Engagement and Increase Participation in Democracies. I mentioned to you I might have answered the question differently yesterday. I mentioned that we had 28 member states on our governing council. The recommendations were designed to those democracies that serve on the Community of Democracies Governing Council and were meant to encourage them to be a model and to set the example of how to engage young people in public life. But with the announcement of the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations today, you've heard that we are going to be working on a global youth democracy network supported by the United States and supported by our Canadian presidency and the governing council members of the Community of Democracies. So we're going to be working, beginning from today, our youth leads will be working with our governing council, but also I think with many of you here that we've had time to meet over the last few days. And we're going to look to try to design a means to best promote and advocate the implementation of those 20 policy recommendations that were presented this morning and that were originally presented last December. To us, youth engagement, to the democracies of the Community of Democracies, youth engagement in public life is vital to building stable and resilient democracies and truly inclusive societies. And as such, the Community of Democracies based in Warsaw, our member states all across the world, and then our youth leads, as well as I hope partnership with young people that are gathered with us here today, are going to continue to strengthen youth engagement, and we stand ready to work with member states from Latin America and this region and how to best put into practices those recommendations to further bring young people front and center in public life. Ambassador Thomas Greenfield asked us each to go away with one commitment today, one step we were going to take, and that is the step of the Community of Democracies and its youth leads to begin to work with all of you to make certain that these recommendations are not just something that we leave behind today, but are something that we take today and we begin to implement. So thank you for your question, and it's been a pleasure to be with you. And thank you, Costa Rica, for your support to this important initiative.
Muchas gracias, señor Thomas Garrett, secretario
Thank you, Mr.
general
Thomas
de la
Garrett.
Comunidad de las Democracias.
General President of Democracies. Next question will be for Rafael Pérez Garcia, the Minister of Youth of Dominican Republic, and he will be asked by Laura Saltaman, representative of Young Women's Networks, Afro Empower Women. Thank you for all of you present here. It's an honor to be here. My name is Laura Saltamaquia Simons, and I represent and co-founder of the international collective Afro Powerful. We are watchful of our reproductive rights and Afro descendants throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. And as it was mentioned, my question is to Rafael Garcia, the Minister Miguel Garcia. From your experience as a young person in decision-making environments, what are the affirmative actions to generate the participation of young persons in political spaces, in political and democratic spaces? Thank you for the question. And I like the name of your organization. And you call me sir, I feel older. Thank you to Rodrigo Chavez, President of Costa Rica. Surprised me, I met him virtually, but he's so open, so frank, it's very interesting. That's the way we have to do. Rodrigo Arias, President of Congress. And yesterday we had lunch. Ire Gomez, President of the Supreme Court. Very interesting, your participation. And Arnoldo Andres, Foreign Affairs Minister. And also Kate Ward Hudson, which is the Vice Minister of Youth. We have shared many things before, and also for the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas. I think she left, but leads the delegation to Costa Rica and the rest of the ambassadors of diplomatic body, especially in Roger, Gabi, Thomas, and our representative of UNICEF in Costa Rica. Muchas gracias. Thank you. And especially all the youth. And I ask a hand for the youth who are present. Show up that you are the main figures. And a good friend from the Dominican Republic, our ambassador, Hati Roman, who is all in supporting youngsters in order to be part of this type of discussions. Thank you, Judicial, for the opportunity and for supporting Dominican youth. I want to summarize my presentation. Now my time start. 3 minutes and a bit more. I would like to summarize my presentation in 3 points. We have mentioned not just in this panel, but this encounter for democracy, but in different spaces internationally. A lot of reflection on this topic, but maybe I think the only Ministry of Youth, the only country that have a Ministry of Youth, of the youth.
First, what has to do with juvenile participation. Second, the aspect of opportunities. And third, as support. Youth participation, we have had the motivation of youth to participate in politics, but there must be an example in order to participate. There must be positive reference, so the youth, that one way or the other, we want to make a change. There must be a transformation in our society from our knowledge, so that we have success stories to say, I want to be like so-and-so, I want to be like the ambassador, like the president, like the minister. Or not necessarily in the political aspect. You could exercise politics from the civil society. You can exercise politics from the neighborhood boards, from the social clubs, from the youth pastoral. And I think it's key also that those people that one way or the other, as Mr. President said in the intervention, if at the end the spaces will be filled, and if the good people that understand that know how to do politics are not occupied, they'll be occupied by people that have the conviction and the training of exercising politics. And I think that's a key principle. He who's not by conviction or vocation in politics will be for that reason. Will be very distorted the essence of nature, that is politics. Politics as science. Politics, as I said, is the nicest science after philosophy. Nevertheless, sometimes there are some people that have misinterpreted this science or essence, and that they wanted to satisfy it to satisfy personal needs. And we have to do culture with that, and the youth can be examples in you, a way how to do politics, how to do different politics. not only of word but of action. The second point that reference being copying, well, you asked the question concerning the opportunity. Since the youth are interested and motivated in making politics, that would to free the opportunity from the political parties and from the civil society organizations and being in decision-making positions, and from the government also, and not simply as what a share or a quota, or if it were just a symbolic position. Oh, we have a youth, I took him to the government or her to the government, that's it. No, but now we have the third part, the part of support. The youth thinks in a disruptive way, something of the youth features that we think in an innovative way, in a disruptive way, in a totally different manner or way to the past. Being youth is not being accomplished with the past, in a negative past especially. And so the youth has the interest in participating in politics, number one. If given the opportunity of working in office in a public position, the issue of being a public servant, I've made politics since I'm 12 years old. I know that I'm old and finished, but I'm 26 years. In spite of 26 years, I only have. And I've never gone out on vacation. They say that he who likes what he does never works, and that's why I have not worked one day in my life. I took 1 week of vacation to see a baseball game that the Dominican Republic lost. It's a sign that I should not take vacations again. But he who does what he likes, he never works. So those who are interested in participating in politics, number one. And number two, it gives the position in a space, a decision maker. For instance, I'm the minister, the youngest minister in all the history of my country. And before that, I was deputy rector of university. When I was just 23 years old, I received the opportunity. They always ask for experience. We'll never have experience if we would never receive an opportunity. And from there, the support to the dreams, the support to the ideas, the support to the projects, because we can have someone young in the position, but the idea and the ideas proposed by him or her, by a popular consultation or your own idea, we do not support it. And I say we do not support it because that will has to be reflected in the budgets. And I exhort each one of the youth representatives of Ecuador, different countries, to create a ministry of youth. A ministry of youth that will not solve the problems of millions of youth in each of the countries, but that one way or the other, having that position in the Minister Council, it will be an authorized voice to be able to talk on behalf of all the youths of the country. And to wrap up now, I want to thank the opportunity, maybe give a last message to overcome the adultcentrism that causes so much damage to the youth, and exhort you to visit the Dominican Republic, which is the nicest country in the world. Well, Costa Rica is also, but the Dominican Republic also. And congratulations to the Panamanians for winning and the game. Thank you. Thank you, Rafael Felix Garcia, Minister of Youth of the Dominican Republic, for his answer. The next question will be addressed to Mrs. Abby Finkenauer, Special Envoy of the United States for global issues of youth. And the question is asked by Mrs. Ashley Tatiana Berenz Alvarado, who is Council Member, Vice President of the Municipal Council of San Carlos. Good afternoon to all of you. As a rural young woman, it's a great honor and privilege to share today with all of you in an activity that is so important and so enriching for all of us, the youth. The question is the following one.
What message do you have for young people interested in running for office or public service, and how does it have a positive effect on democracy when they do? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ashley, for the question. Thank you also to Costa Rica, the Summit for Democracy, all of the incredible government leaders here today, diplomatic leaders here today, civil society leaders here today, but in particular, thank you to the youth that have showed up here today, both in person and online all across the globe. Thank you. I am just honored to be here on behalf of the United States, and I was appointed by President Joseph Biden in November 2022 to the U.S. Special Envoy for Global Youth. This is the first time the U.S. has ever had a Special Envoy for Global Youth, and it speaks to the dedication that President Biden has put on elevating young people in the United States government and across the globe. It is something that I take very seriously, and again, grateful to get a chance to just talk to the young people here directly today. A few opinions I have about actually how to run for office and the best ways to do it are honestly, the first one, to know your why. You have to know why you are doing it. It cannot be because you want a fancy title or because you think it's going to be fun and you want to be surrounded by fancy chandeliers or things like that. It has to be because you care about your community. It has to be bigger than yourself, because if it is not, you will burn out so quickly. And so that is something I hope you leave here with today. The other piece, don't be afraid to lose. Look, I am somebody who was elected to the Iowa State House at the age of 25, then was elected to the United States Congress at the age of 29. I've won some races, I've also lost some races, but I never ran, again, not afraid to lose. And the reason being this is because of the fact that when you're not afraid to lose, you don't compromise who you are to get a vote or to win an election. You, again, need to know your why, follow that, and again, not be afraid to lose. The other piece is you really don't need to be an expert or know everything about everything before you do. And for this, I'm speaking really directly to the young women in this room and across the globe. It is something that as young women, we grow up thinking we have to be perfect before we do anything. And it is something that, in particular, was ingrained in me even at a very young age. And then I had an opportunity to go meet many members of Congress as I was a page in the U.S. House of Representatives at the age of 16. That experience taught me that these representatives, these people in these positions of power that I grew up reading about, that I watched on TV, they're humans. They put on their pants the same way that I do, and at the end of the day, there is nothing different between us. And there is no reason, again, that young women across the globe aren't able to step up the way that the men have been able to. You deserve a seat at the table, and that is something I want you to hear, and you do not have to, again, be perfect before you do, because I guarantee you the men at the table are not. I also really, really want you to hear this. I need you to find your support networks when you run for office. And I'm not just saying, you know, the networks that are gonna help you knock doors, those type of things, but truly emotional support networks. I think that is something, honestly, that I didn't do when I was running for office at a young age, and I can tell you it takes a toll. You can be surrounded by people all day long, right? Where you think, how can anyone think this person could possibly be lonely? But at the end of the day, it is a really tough thing. You're putting yourself out there, you're putting your name out there, and right now, the online attacks that, again, specifically young women are facing when they become public advocates in many spaces are extreme, they're harsh, and they are dangerous. And so again, find your support networks. Have the people you can talk to and trust. And again, it's something that I'm really excited about to continue to champion on a global level to make sure that the US is stepping up in this space and that all countries are stepping up in this space, because it is important for democracy that you have those networks to rely on and to lean into as you run for office. The other thing I would say is this. The other part of the question had to do with why is it important to have young people? What does that mean? I mean, it's simple. To have a democracy, you have to have a representative democracy. Our youth must be represented at the table. And the other piece, we hear people ask this all the time. Well, how do we get young people excited to vote? Excited to get out there? Well, part of that might be actually seeing people like them run for office. That's a big, big piece of it. So I want you again to hear that you are important, that we need you to take those steps and do it in a way that is safe and in a way that, again, you can continue to make a difference on your community, your country, but also on a global scale. Your voices are so, so important, and I can't tell you again just what an honor it is to get to be here on behalf of the United States, on behalf of President Biden, getting to, again, engage with you, hear your stories. You have inspired me, you've inspired the United States of America, and I can't wait to continue to work with you in this role.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you, Madam Abby Finken, our Special Envoy of the United States for global issues, for global youth issues. The organization of the event has considered important to know also the Canadian experience in promoting democratic participation of youth. For that reason, following, we will show a pre-recorded video of Mr. Robert Oliphant, who is Parliamentary Secretary of Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada.
Esteemed ministers, colleagues,
Estimados ministros, colegas, socios, representantes, es un gran placer participar.
hosted by Costa Rica, which brings together democracies from the Americas and civil society to discuss the important role youth play in our democratic societies. Democracies that encourage youth participation are more responsive to people's needs. They're more innovative, resilient, and sustainable. They're more successful. Democracies need the fresh thinking and perspectives of young people to solve the challenges we all face today. However, ensuring greater youth inclusion, participation, and representation is challenging. It requires fresh solutions. No one has all the answers, and there is no perfect model to copy. We must listen to the growing sense of cynicism among youth towards conventional political processes. We must learn from their input and from their experiences and challenge ourselves to innovate in how we respond. This is why it's imperative for democracies to work together to share best practices and policies to achieve greater youth involvement. We know we must adapt our political institutional structures to provide significant and diverse opportunities for youth to contribute to political, electoral, and governance processes. After all, youth are not only the leaders of the future, but they're the leaders of today. In recent years, Canada has sought new and innovative approaches focused on inclusion of youth in political and democratic spaces, both at home and abroad. Canada actively contributes to youth engagement throughout the Americas. In Colombia, we are working with local partners that are constructing social projects for young Afro-descendant and Indigenous women and girls to foster their involvement in political decision-making. In Colombia and Chile, we're helping students become agents of change at school, in their families, and in their social circles. And in partnership with Parlaméricas, Canada is supporting young women's political leadership in Latin America and the Caribbean. Canada also fosters youth empowerment and political participation globally. We encourage youth representation and participation in UN fora, as this is an important way to help make the UN system more effective, more relevant, more inclusive. We also support youth participation in many international events and in organizations, including the Commonwealth Youth Forum, the Economic and Social Council Youth Forum, the UN Commission on the Status of Women, and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Canada is also a strong supporter of the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda and the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. And we promote youth participation in peace efforts in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Yemen. Lastly, through international programs and internships, Canada is helping to provide young people with valuable experience on issues ranging from women's empowerment to sustainable development to climate change. In Canada, youth are essential to our democracy, and there are many opportunities for young people to help form decisions on important issues. One such way is the Prime Minister's Youth Council. This is a forum for young Canadians to provide advice directly to the Prime Minister and the federal government. Members represent Canada's diversity, including its Indigenous communities, and reflect a range of educational, employment, and life experiences. There are also 13 other youth councils that advise federal ministers and senior officials on topics ranging from the environment to agriculture to immigration. Canada's youth policy seeks to create meaningful opportunities for young people to shape federal priorities, policies, and programs. This is complemented by the State of Youth report, which shares young people's perspectives on their civic and political participation. Canada also increases engagement through the Register of Future Electors, which allows young people approaching voting age to pre-register to vote. We also introduced the Elections Modernization Act, which allows them to participate in the administration of elections. And programs such as Youth Take Charge and Exchanges Canada help fund organizations that teach young people about government and democracy and give them opportunities to engage directly. Democracies worldwide need to be resilient. They need to evolve to meet the challenges we are all facing. And it's critically important that we support youth involvement in democracy globally. Canada will continue to be at the forefront of these efforts, both at home and abroad. Thank you.
To finish with this table, we have now a message also, a pre-recorded message from Ms. Jutta Urpilainen, who is the Commissioner for International Partnerships of the European Union, that we'll see now.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to address the second Summit for Democracy. Thank you, Costa Rica, for co-hosting this event. I started as a youth activist and politician. I know that the future of democracy lies with youth. This is why empowering youth is my top priority as the Commissioner for International Partnerships. It has been an honor to co-lead the Youth Civic and Political Participation cohort. We have done this together with democracies, civil society, youth networks, and international organizations. I applaud the first two deliverables from the cohort: the menu of possible commitments offered to governments and the Youth Participation Handbook. Together, they lay the groundwork for empowering youth worldwide. Youth need a voice in all cohorts, anywhere key decisions take place. The European Union is working hard to make that happen. I created the first youth sounding board for international partnerships to give youth a seat at the EU decision-making table. Today we are opening a call for applications for its renewal. I encourage all interested young people to apply and engage. We are also setting up more youth sounding boards around the world. In October, the EU launched the first ever Youth Action Plan in external action. It was product of teamwork with more than 220 international stakeholders. The priority of the plan is to increase the voice and leadership of young people in policy and decision-making, especially young girls. The €40 million Women and Youth in Democracy initiative is key part of it, and today we launch two of its key components. First, the EU works with the European Partnership for Democracy to increase youth participation, democracy activism, and support and civic education. We build on the success of democracy schools, of whom you heard this morning. Second, together with the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, we support peer-to-peer parliament cooperation for youth and women. We offer coaching and training and develop young politicians and women caucuses. Dear friends, democracy is severely challenged. We must work together to turn the tide. We must empower the largest generation of youth in history. Together, we must defend the universal values we hold most dear.
De esta manera damos por concluido este panel de expertos. Quisiera solicitar a los expertos que nos han acompañado que pasen al salón y que los despidamos con un fuerte aplauso. Continuamos de inmediato con el último panel.
We thank Dr. Picao for moderating the second segment of today. Let's give him a good hand, a round of applause. Now we invite President of the Republic to give some closing words for this event. Very well. Once again, I greet with great respect and appreciation Mr. President of Congress of Costa Rica, Mr. Magistrate Justice President of the Supreme Court of Justice, and Mr. Justice President of the Supreme Elections Tribunal, and obviously my colleagues of government and the ministers that are visiting us, and Your Excellencies, ambassadors of friendly nations, and especially the youth that is attending here and the youth that is watching us throughout the world. This week, we have had journeys and events, parallel journeys and events to the second Summit for Democracy. I enjoy very much observing that the people debate with passion, with arguments, with counter-arguments about if, for instance, democracy is being challenged or not. What those challenges are? What are the perspectives and futures of democracy? And aside of that, regardless of those debates, what I do observe, at least among ourselves, and I believe that the huge majority of the hearts of the human beings, regardless of where they live, there is a consensus that democracy is the way of government. As Winston Churchill said, and Mr. Rodrigo Arias mentioned it, the most imperfect way of government, except all the other ones, aside from all the other ones, until someone discovers something less wrong or better, then it's convenient for us to continue practicing that way of government, millenary way of government that I'm sure has made the greatest amount of people in the world happy, who had the blessing of living under one of those regimes. That is conclusion number one. Is the best way of government. The second conclusion, well, that it does not happen by spontaneous generation. that it, it is not strengthened by itself. It requires work, effort, love, that we have to defend it. Because obviously, who governs without democracy governs without limits or boundaries, and for what he or she wants to govern. Democracy represents weights and counterweights, or balances and counterbalances, division of powers. Democracy represents accountability and consequences for whoever breaches the law and the rights of others. Therefore, there are people in the world that prefer, out of their personal interest, even out of meanness, to govern out of democracy. And that is our challenge, to forbid that happening, and that our democratic institutions may fall in the attacks of other forms of government, such as authoritarianism, military dictatorship. No, we have work to do. We have talked also in this forum of how to make democracy like rules of the game that may enable what English speakers call the fair play. The fair play, that the court is leveled, because that is what allows the competition of ideas and skills, competition of which is the future vision. That answerness is what democracy, in my humble opinion, really represents. And the best one may win. There is epistemological competition. There must be a epistemological competition about the ideas to compete in that stadium of democracy. Otherwise, we would be stuck in the system of governments of previous century. And even in democratic regimes, still would have limitations to the women vote. The United States of America, that democracy is so admirable, began with a democracy of men that had land and that were aristocrats. There are people of the races that did not even have the liberty or freedom. The women could not vote. And yes, that was one of the first democracies. But it was a very imperfect democracy. And thanks to the rules of the game, of the competition of ideas, of visions of the world, of answerness through popular vote, that democracy in our country, our beloved Costa Rica, and those of Europe, we were able to progress of a system through an imperfect system, but that can be made perfectible. And we have moved to unacceptable results from today's prisma to a world that has improved a lot. Perfect? No. That we have to improve it? Yes, certainly. And that's what we're doing, and that's what we got together these days. But okay, this gets me down to the topic of youth, or I should mention the youth. I have bad news or good news for you youth. A young person is nothing more else than an elder adult in training process. It's a reality. The great difference is that you have the world, your life forward, instead of, like in my case, that most of my life I see it backwards now. They ask me, how many years do you have, Mr. President Chavez? And I answer, 15, 20. And the people look at me and they say, yes, because the ones I have are the ones that I have left. The other ones I already spent them. You still have more years than I, youth of the world. Many more years, and therefore you have much more right and many more obligations of trying to control the spaces where decisions are made that are going to affect your lives longer than mine, the life of your children, and the general well-being of society. It would be great or fabulous. That would have been a desire of all of us, I believe, that the elder could talk with the young person, that same person, and could reach an agreement of what would have they done for both to be happier in the moment that they existed. I think that the young person would probably have done more exercise, and the senior citizen probably would have counseled saving more. But that inconsistency, because at some measure that is an inconsistency of the preferences and the actions of the same person as they move forward in the evolution of life as part of the marvelous trip or journey that you as youth have before you. But do not lose sight the destination where you're heading to become a senior citizen. And in that respect, I say, the panel said it very well where I was. Mother Nature hates vacuum. It does not allow it. And if you do not take that space, if you do not try, do not compete in the rules of democracy to be part of the rudder of the destination, the ship of society, someone else will do it for you, regardless of the age that you may have or of whoever is governing. It could be someone that doesn't care about Mother Nature, doesn't care about sustainability, environmental sustainability, that doesn't care that you may have pure air, clean oceans, fresh rivers, where to live. It could be someone that doesn't care what the interest rate. Listen to something so boring as the interest rate. For when you are ready to purchase your house and may have the capacity of buying that house, there's that tension between the young human being, the same person, and the old human being, the same person. But there are also those tensions between generations. It would have been nicer than to those who had the power in the past in countries that today have terrible environmental conditions would have been more aware about the young people that were coming behind them. Not one generation, 5 or 10 generations behind. It would have been nicer. Wouldn't it have been nicer that the society would have treated better the minorities that are living together with us nowadays, giving them greater opportunities over there, instead of we having to fight much harder now today to give them the opportunities that were denied to them by generations and that have effect throughout time for certain groups of people. Well, that is the challenge that I present to you. I present that challenge to prepare yourselves. I present the challenge to the elected governments, elected democratically in a democracy, to provide human capital. What does that mean? Productivity of each one of you young people, of the children that are entering into kindergarten today, and those who have not been born yet. We only need 2 things actually. Health, to form neuronal connections that we need, and that is health, physical health and mental health. Safe homes, nurturing environments, that nurture physical and mental health of people. And then the next one, take that machine, the greatest machine that has existed in the universe until we can see, called the human brain, and provide the skills, cognitive skills, the values, behavior values, the citizenship in the classic Greek Aristotelic sense, where it was said that politics was the most noble of professions, and then nowadays that's so much to wish in so many places. Your demands for spaces, the will of competing with your ideas and your actions, with the obligation of the government, democratic government, of provide minimum services so you can develop human capital and can be competitors, tough competitors in the world of ideas with respect and dialogue, are, from my standpoint, the two challenges of you as young people, of the governments of this world, and certainly of the current and future societies. I wish you a happy life, and that life, I cannot imagine it being happy under any other regime that is not a democratic regime. Thank you very much. God bless you, and we will see each other. We thank Mr. President for his words, and also thank all of you who have accompanied us in this second Summit for Democracy. We are very happy being co-hosts in this important event. The President of the Republic invites you to participate in the closing ceremony that will take place in the former Customs House. Those who want to can accompany him. That will leave in a few minutes and go walking from here to the former Customs building. Good evening.
Children make up 1/3 of the population. They're our present and our future. So their participation is critical if we hope to create a more equitable world. One where justice leads without sentiments of prejudice. One that is inclusive and takes into account the dynamics of our humanity. But all too often, kids are left out of the conversation. Save the Children is committed to changing that. During the 2022 Summit for Democracy Year of Action, we supported roundtable events in 8 countries, from the United States to Zambia. More than 80 youth advocates connected with people in government and civil society, raising the issues that matter most to them, like gender equality, climate justice, investment in public services, and protection of civic spaces. They held their leaders accountable and advocated for change. They called upon governments to involve child activists in decision-making, because those decisions could impact kids for generations. Plus, when young people share their unique experiences, we create policies that work better for everyone. If the world excludes kids, we'll miss out on the energy, positivity, and innovation they have to offer. They are creative idea generators, powerful champions for democracy, and fierce defenders of human rights. So together, we're making sure children have a platform to make an impact. Because building a brighter tomorrow starts with making change today.